Hey everyone, in this video I want to talk about the Azure Savings Plan for Compute, what it is, how I would use it, and how it differs from what we may already be used to with Azure Reservations. And I think the best way to explain this is to actually go back and look at the Azure Reservations mechanism. If I think about the compute services in Azure, there's a huge amount of them. And I can really think about, if we take this axis, we can think about all the different compute services. So I could think about, hey, if these are the compute services available, there are things like Azure Functions, there's app service plans, there's things like Azure Container Instances, there's things like dedicated host, and then there's all the different VM families. So with Azure Reservations, you get some flexibility in the size of VM, but it has to be within the certain flexibility group. For example, I might have we'll say a DAV4, DDV4, and EV5, and MSV2, and there's a whole set of all of those different types of virtual machines. So I can think of, I have this whole big family of different virtual machine SKUs, in addition to things like dedicated host, Azure Container Instances, app services, and functions. And remember, when we talk about this, the whole point is, when I think of virtual machines, well, we have things like virtual machine scale sets that, of course, create virtual machines. And then we have things like Azure Kubernetes Services node pools. Well, they use VMSS under the cover. And then Azure Virtual Desktop, the session host, well, they're sitting on that as well. So when we think about, hey, using virtual machines, realizing it's more than just, hey, I'm creating a VM. There's virtual machine scale sets, which is then used by things like AKS node pools, Azure Virtual Desktop Session Host, and other services. So if that's this axis, then we also have the idea of, well, there's lots of regions where I can use those services. So hey, maybe it's East US, East US 2, West US, etc., etc. There's a whole bunch of those. And if I think about a reservation, an Azure reservation, the way it would work is I would create that reservation for a specific service, so a very specific, for example, VM flexibility group in a very specific region. So hey, maybe I went and created an Azure reservation in East US 2 for the EV5. Maybe I created a different reservation for the DDV4 in West US. So they were super, super specific. Now, one thing to consider is that if I look at things, for example, like a virtual machine, do realize there might be two components to the money I pay for that service. Because I can really think about, for a virtual machine, well, there's the infrastructure side. And by the infrastructure side, we're really thinking about, hey, that compute service that's offering a certain number of virtual CPUs and memory. And then separately from that, there could be a license element. For example, that could be Windows, it could be SQL, and there are other things as well. And the whole point is, when we talk about all of these different types of reservations, these services, the bit we are focusing on, and this is important, is the infrastructure part of the cost. This. So this is the part that's going to get both the discount for example, the Azure Reservation and Savings Plan we're going to talk about, and it's also what counts towards our commit. So we're actually using that as part of meeting that commitment we're going to make to use amount. So that's our whole commit consumption. That license part does not get the discount. That license part of any cost does not count towards the commit consumption we're making. There are things to help optimize the license cost. This is where I could use things like, let's use green for this, Azure Hybrid Benefit. So where I have certain licenses covered by, for example, EAs, then I get the ability to use that license, carry that license into the cloud and not pay that portion again in Azure. But a super important thing is when we talk about these savings and these commits we're going to make, it's towards the infrastructure component of the cost, not any licensing component. So that's really the big deal. Now, if I think about this, I'm going to make a commitment. And that's really the whole point of what we're going to do. So when I do these, for example, Azure Reservations, but we're going to see this carries on, I can think of it as an hourly element. So each hour, there's really a billing mechanism that wakes up. Hey, hour 1, hour 2, hour 3. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit. I'm committing in the Azure Reservation world to use a certain amount of this specific SKU in this specific region. So I have this commit amount. And then what's going to happen with my usage, every hour that billing mechanism wakes up, and hey, in hour 1, I happen to use exactly that amount. Well, great. All of that would get that committed discounted rate, and all of that counts towards it. If there's times that I used more, well, then this portion gets the committed discount. The rest of it, well, that would just be pay-as-you-go pricing. So I can still use more, but that's what happens. Now, if I was to use less, well, I'm still paying for that committed amount. So I'm committing to use a certain amount, I will always pay that amount. And that commitment term is typically 1 or 3 years. And the point is the longer I commit to, generally the bigger the discount I would get. So the key point, and this is important when you think about when I choose how much to use of these things, this commit, you always pay. That's the minimum you'll pay any hour in the Azure Reservations world of that particular SKU in that particular region. Now, when I create these Azure Reservations, I do have flexibility as to, well, I'm committing to this duration at a certain scope. And I can really think there's 4 different scopes that I might think about. If I'm in an enterprise agreement, for example, then I have an enrollment. If it's a Microsoft customer agreement, it's a billing profile. Pay-as-you-go, it could be the same subs by the same account admin. But I could have the scope as shared, i.e. that enrollment level, that billing profile, that admin. I could have it at a certain management group. I could have it at a certain subscription. I can have it at a certain resource group. And if I had multiple Azure Reservations, then the most specific one that applied to resource would apply first, and then upwards only. Remember, it's a billing adjustment. It wakes up every hour. Hey, where can I apply this discount? Apply it, and it carries on. So this is great, but it is super, super rigid. And that's one of the really challenges you have. I'm going to commit to spend a certain amount of this SKU for 1 to 3 years of this particular flexibility group. I can change the sizes within the DV4, but I couldn't just go and use an EV5 or some new version comes along. And it has to be in that region. Now, one of the things you do have with Azure Reservations today is the ability to trade in. So I could take, for example, hey, I have this dollar amount remaining of a reservation. I can take that and trade it in towards a new reservation, which could then be, I could change SKU, for example. I could go and change that towards a newly starting commitment. However, that trade-in ability for compute services they have announced is going away at the start of 2024. So while today, yes, I can trade in a reservation before it's finished and take the financial amount that's left that I'm committed to and put that towards a brand new 1 or 3 year term, has to at least be that amount, that is going away at the start of 2024. So yes, Azure Reservations, great. And it's important to understand all these constructs because they're still going to apply to the new thing we're going to talk about. But it's very, very rigid. And that rigidity may limit the amount we can commit to. Because I'm like, well, hey, I want to use other regions. I may change my plans in the future. So it puts a real crimp on how much I'm really willing to commit. So how can we solve that? What's the brand new shiny thing? So if this was Azure Reservations, super, super rigid, a specific flexibility family in a specific region, well, now what we have is this idea of this savings plan for compute. Now, once again, this is 1 or 3 year commit. And I'm basically committing to a certain amount of money per hour of compute. But here's the thing, is dollar per hour of any compute service that's included in any region. So when I go and create my Azure Savings Plan for compute, if that was the Azure Reservation, this very small square, what's covered now in this new savings plan is, well, that. Everything. Every region, every compute service that is included. And so when you think about what services are included, there are some restrictions on some of those things. It's really focused around the idea of its functions, but for functions, it has to be a premium plan. App services, if it's premium v3 or isolated v2, Azure container instances, dedicated hosts, and then pretty much all of the virtual machine SKUs. There's a few that aren't included. I think the A series, because that's really been deprecated. I think the original G series. But outside of that, it's covered. So I just go and create a savings plan, and I don't specify a region. I don't specify a compute service. It just gets it. It's the same hourly wake up. So that billing engine just wakes up, and it's going to work the same way. It wakes up each hour. Hey, you've committed to this amount. What services fall in to that commitment? Now, the discount you get differs by service. So what it will do is it will apply itself first to whichever gives you the biggest discount in that particular hour, and then sort of go downwards. So it's going to try and find you the biggest discount every hour for what you have running across all those different services, and then go upwards. If you use over that, then it's just pay as you go. If you use less, you're going to pay that always committed amount per hour. Once again, my scopes are the same. I can do it those enrollments level, those billing profiles, subscriptions, management groups, resource groups, all of those same things apply to this. And I can kind of show this really easily, because if we just try and create a savings plan for a second, now I can't in my crummy subscriptions, but the whole point is, notice this is the complete screen to create a savings profile. The only thing you have to do is a billing subscription. You pick the scope, you pick the term, and you pick the amount. I am not picking a service. I am not picking a region. This is all the regions. This is all of the included compute services. And you can, for the billing, it can just bill you monthly, or you can pay it up front. It's not asking for any other detail because there isn't any other detail. That's it. The whole point of the savings plan is this phenomenal flexibility. It's the compute services. And I'm just committing to spend a certain amount on compute services in Azure for 1 or 3 years, and it's going to discount stuff. And again, I can change every hour. It can be different services, and every hour in different regions, and every hour it will just wake up. Hey, where can I give you the biggest discount? Okay, I'll give you a discount to those first, and then upwards and upwards until you've used up that commit amount, and then it's just regular pay as you go. So that's the key point. But again, you do want to think about what is my commitment, because you're always going to pay that commitment dollar per hour for compute services, even if there's a particular hour you're paying less. So every hour, change services, change regions, it does not care. And just like reserved instances, of course, we talk about VMs, but that means it also applies to virtual machine scale sets. It also does apply to AKS node pools. It does apply to AVD session hosts. Today, the pricing calculator doesn't show you the savings plan option for node pools or Azure Virtual Desktop. That's a mistake. I did notify engineering, and they're aware, but they did confirm it does apply. So think of the flexibility you have now. I can create one of these savings plans for compute, and maybe I'm starting off with VMs, and then I move to VM scale sets, then I move to AKS for containers, hey, then I move to app service plans, then I move to Azure Container Instances, then I move to functions. I might go from a couple of regions to lots of regions. None of those things require me to think about my savings plan. It doesn't care. And as I grow over time, hey, I can just add new savings plans for additional amounts of money. And it just becomes additive. Now, I can still use reserved instances and Azure Reservations. They're not going away because Azure Reservations will still give you a bigger discount compared to the savings plan. So it may be as a company, there are some particular SKUs that I'm comfortable. I definitely want to use this SKU for 1 or 3 years. I want the bigger discount, knowing I'll no longer be able to trade it in. So Azure Reservations would apply first for matching resources. Then it would apply savings plans, and then it would apply pay as you go. So you may very well have buckets of, hey, I've got some Azure Reservations, I've got some savings plan, then, hey, I've just got my regular pay as you go services. And once again, licenses are not included as part of the discount or as part of that commitment. And the pricing calculator will show that. And as we talk about the pricing calculator, that's where I can go and see, well, what discounts would I actually get? And it confirms what services are in scope. So to save a bit of time, I did pre-populate the pricing calculator. So I've added functions. Now it does have to be the premium tier, but then I can see, hey, look, I've got this option. Pay as you go, or with a savings plan for functions, it would be a 17% discount. Then for app service, now for app service, again, it has to be this premium V3. I think isolated V2 as well applies. And notice, hey, I've now got savings plan options. So notice I've still got the reserved instance option, which is a bigger discount, but I now also have the savings plan. So if I had a savings plan, hey, I would go and get those discounts. It was a little bit less, but again, it's the flexibility. Azure Container Instances. Oh, yep, I've got savings plan options there. 1 or 3 years. There it is. Dedicated host, that's going to vary. Again, this is where normally it's the newer SKUs get you the bigger discounts. So for dedicated host and the savings plan amount and the reserved instance amounts, there's actually a pretty big delta there. So that might be saying it's like, hey, if I did have that reserved, those dedicated hosts, I might think, hey, here I can commit to a certain amount. Maybe an Azure reservation makes more sense for me. I want that bigger discount on that particular service. And then virtual machines is going to vary greatly. Again, the newer SKUs tend to get you the better discount. But here, once again, I could see, hey, the reserved instance, and I can now see, hey, yep, the savings plan would apply to these as well. And just to be, I know I keep mentioning it over and over again, but to be super clear, I'm not creating a separate savings plan for all of those things. I just create a savings plan. The pricing calculator is simply showing me, hey, if you have a savings plan, this is the discount you'll get on those particular services. So the whole point is it's the flexibility. I now don't have to think about, well, do I really want to lock myself into 1 or 3 years in this particular region of this very specific SKU? What if a newer version comes along? Well, that trading ability goes away in 2024, so maybe that flexibility is more important to me. So you have the choice. But that's really it. I mean, that's the whole point of the savings plan for compute. It's all about, I'm getting those discounts. I'm committing to Microsoft. I'm going to use a certain amount of compute over 1 or 3 year term. And so you get discounts. The discounts vary, but I can see it in the pricing calculator. Again, Azure Reservations are still here. They give a bigger discount. They will get applied first to matching resources, then the savings plan. And then if I've got more over that, it's just the pay as you go. But this is just a far, far simpler mechanism. I think this will probably become really the hero motion for most organizations because of that flexibility. Because as a company, I can go from VM to VMSS to AKS to app services to ACI to functions from a couple of regions to 10 regions without ever changing anything about that savings plan. So that was it. I hope that explains what the savings plan is, and good luck.